Okay, hi Melinda, how are you? Actually, I'm
Good
going to
morning.
start that again. I'm going to introduce you. That was not ceremonious enough at all. Hi, this is Erin, and welcome to Everything EFL, a podcast about language teaching. I'm not an expert on the subjects I choose to talk about, but I've been around and I know some stuff. Credit will be given where possible in the episode or in the show notes. Okay, so joining me today is a really lovely lady that I met through newteachersconnect _IG on Instagram. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Melinda Thomas. Hi, Melinda, how are you?
Good morning, or should I say good day, because we're definitely in different time zones right now. Yeah, I'm super excited to do this with you. I mean, anytime where we can support teachers, it's awesome. So I'm excited.
Feelings absolutely mutual. So what I thought we'd do today, guys, we're talking about advice for new teachers, but we're coming from quite different angles. If you just want to tell the listeners your teaching background first.
Yes, absolutely. So I am an elementary education teacher. I currently teach first grade, and I've been teaching for quite a few years. So I have a lot of good advice and a lot of good suggestions that I would love to share.
You are a mainstream school teacher, I would say,
Yes.
an actual teacher. I come from a background where I've worked primarily in private English language schools. And then I
Mhm.
also know that some of my listeners, for example, could be French. They're working in, like, let's say, a French mainstream school. But because of the huge wave of immigration we've had over the past 10, 15 years, there are a lot of students who come in with English or native language difficulties and sort of all the issues that accompany that. So it's kind of a sort of a middle ground between what you're teaching, what I'm teaching, because I'm
Right.
assuming where you are as well, you have a lot of students where English isn't their first language.
Absolutely. Our classrooms are a combination. We have students that don't speak English. We have students with special needs. So we have what we would call an inclusive classroom. And fortunately, when we have different supports, for example, we have ESOL teachers that sometimes they will push in, sometimes they'll, have they'll pull out the students to provide those additional supports. It makes a world of difference.
And I think like, even though we're coming from very different sort of educational backgrounds and
Hmm.
fields, I think one thing that's really come to the fore in the last year with the pandemic is well-being. And I know that you're quite into that. Your Instagram posts reflect that. So I'm really excited to see what you're going to bring to the table today. But for the listeners, we don't know what each other's going to say. So we may well have the same ideas. We might have completely different ideas. Obviously, I'm going to be approaching it more from an EFL perspective, a slightly more linguistic perspective, maybe. But it might be interesting just to see how we do or we don't meet in the middle, and what common ground we can find just as teachers.
Right.
So yeah, let's go. Do you want to go first? What's your first piece of advice?
So it's hard to figure out which one to start with, but the most important one would be, as you mentioned, self-care. As a teacher, it's so important to prioritize your health, schedule your life around your health and not your job. And I think even though we're coming from different perspectives, you said the EFL and me coming from a general education perspective, we both agree that it's a lot of work,
Yeah.
and it can, if you allow it to, I can't say if you allow it to, because naturally it takes 100% to be present and to make sure that your students are getting what they need. But you also have to keep in mind at the end of the day that you have to remember to replenish yourself. What do I need to be my best? Because if we are not our best, we can't give our best to
Yeah.
our students.
I totally
So
agree. Yeah.
yes,
But I think that sometimes that is easier said than done, because no matter
absolutely.
no matter what your teaching background, no matter what you're teaching, we teach because we're passionate about it and we love our job. And,
Absolutely.
our priority does tend to be our work, our students. We've probably all been there where we've spent hours preparing lessons and
Yes.
things like that. But you're absolutely right. And I think also I would say EFL teaching has generally been less stressful historically, you're generally, not always, but if you're teaching, let's say, young adults, you've got a group of students who are already motivated, stuff like that. You're
Right.
teaching one very specific thing, and you can teach it in a variety of very sort of engaging and dynamic ways. However, I think with the advent of online teaching, I think a lot of EFL teachers are probably experiencing a lot more stress this year.
Mm.
Now, have you had, are you teaching online at the moment, and has it changed in sort of terms of stress level or anxiety or anything like that?
Yes, we are teaching online, and it definitely has added a new level of challenge. Let's just start with the technical difficulties. Sometimes you can have this amazing lesson plan put together, you're ready to teach it, and then Zoom starts to glitch.
Yeah.
And then for some reason the internet goes out, which and all those things have happened to me. And so in the classroom as teachers, they say, they praise us for having patience, but this is another and a new level of patience that we have to have, because we're dealing with a lot of different factors that are really out of our control. And that's why, Erin, I say that it's very important to have that moment to say, you know what? I gave my all today. It's time for me to decompress. And decompression, it doesn't have to be, going to this expensive spa down the road. It doesn't have to be any of those things. It can be as simple as taking a deep breath, standing outside of your house. Of course, we're following CDC safety rules and everything like that. Of course, 6 feet. But, just standing outside of your house, taking in the fresh air, having a seat, just taking a seat for a moment and just thinking, today was rough, or today was a good day. And it makes a world of difference for the next day.
Yeah. And I think having a mantra as well, like, my lovely friend Erin Myers, who I've recorded with a couple of times from California, she says, "You're enough." And I think that's really important as well. Even if like you have the worst lesson and it's all a disaster, like you have to remember that you tried your best.
Absolutely.
And things will go wrong.
It isn't easy, but you mentioned a word, and that word was passion. And I think that goes to another thing that I would advise teachers is that let that thing, whatever that thing is, let that drive you, because every day is not going to be easy. When you came into teaching, what was it that you wanted to do? What was it that you said, this is the impact that I want to make? You have to remember that, and you have to keep that very close to you,
Yeah.
because if you lose that, then it's very easy for things to come in, to flood in, and make you question, is this for me? And I think,
Yeah.
many teachers have that moment where they're like, today was really bad. Is this for me? Should I be doing this? So it's good to have that one thing, at least that one thing that makes you remember, this is why I'm doing this, and this is why I'm going to show up tomorrow.
Lovely sound advice there from Melinda. Okay, I'm going to talk about something. It could be more EFL related, but you can tell me what you
Sure.
think of this. It's both related to what teachers say in class. My first piece of advice for new teachers is, if you don't know the answer to a question, if a student asks you, could be a grammar question, for example, don't blag it and try and answer the question. Be honest and say, "I'll tell you tomorrow." English is a very complicated language. Let me write down a couple of notes and get back to you. I always say, let me do a bit of research, let me ask my colleagues, and I'll get back to you tomorrow. And I try and, if I remember, put a 5-minute space in my lesson plan for the next day to address that.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, this is really important in an EFL classroom. It goes with the whole communication theory that we kind of abide by religiously, is stop talking. It's not your show. Okay. If that's your thing, make a podcast or join a local theatre group or, something like that. But you're there to facilitate, to explain, to instruct. Nothing annoys me more than teachers who use the classroom as like their own little personal stage. And I've seen it. I've observed teachers before, and I've had to say to them, this is not the insert name here show. You're here to extract as much linguistic production as you can from your students. You're not here to perform, and it's so frustrating to watch.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I think that I know children have so much to offer. And when you give them the floor, when you give them a platform where they feel, I have a voice, we have to keep in mind that a lot of children feel that they don't have that. And if you think of yourself as an adult coming into something new, we oftentimes get that feeling like I don't have a voice because I'm new, or because I'm the youngest person here, or because I have the least amount of experience. But then you think about it and you're like, you know what? I do know something. I do have some skills to do what it is that I need to do. But sometimes it takes someone giving you that floor to say, hey, this is a safe space for you to express your ideas, for you to express your opinion on what you think. And even as adults, we need that. So just imagine for children how they need a safe space to feel like, okay, my opinion matters. And as teachers, you're absolutely right. General educators should, I should say, have that same mentality that we are facilitators.
Yeah, we're approaching this from such different perspectives. Like you're more about giving people a voice, and I'm kind of speaking from a more mechanical angle of just allowing them to actually speak rather than listen. But it's very interesting. It's very interesting, and that's why I thought it would be a good idea for us to do this, because we're kind of being very global here about everything, which is nice.
Mhm.
The only other thing I would say to that, again, going back to the EFL perspective, is
Yeah,
obviously with lower levels, you will have to talk more, but you can also address the class in the form of questions, rather than just talking at them. So
right.
one, it gets students used to question forms, which they usually struggle with anyway. And it kind of keeps them on their toes. It engages them. It forces them to listen a bit more. Because if someone's just blah, 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 they're just going to fall asleep. But if you're constantly asking questions, going, okay, what do you think, John? What do you think, Magda? Huh? What? They know that they're going to be spoken to directly. So I think that makes a big difference as well.
Mhm.
Okay. Do you have another one?
Oh, yes, I do. And it's very easy, when you're already at a high level of stress, it's very easy for little things to then set you off. So, one advice that I would give to teachers is to always imagine yourself from the outside looking in. So, just imagine yourself in a store, for example, and you're looking through the window, okay? And you're watching yourself interact with someone who you may not be agreeing with, or you may be, well, let's just say that you may not be agreeing with. Would you be proud of how you're handling the situation? Would you be proud of how you're talking to that person? Would you be proud of how you are listening to that person? It's the same way in the classroom. We work with, I call them little people every day, and some people are working with big people, adults. So I always have to keep in mind, am I responding or am I reacting?
Mm,
Am I being an example to my students as to how to communicate when things aren't going well?
yeah.
Am I being an example for my students of how to handle stress?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, again, easier said than done sometimes. Like in an EFL environment, I would say that kind of thing comes up a lot with, if you're teaching a very multicultural classroom, you might have some students from the Middle East, you might have some from sort of Eastern Asia, you might have some from South America, all with very different worldviews. And very occasionally certain things pop up in discussion that other cultures or nationalities would completely disagree with or find offensive, or even they might say something very offensive in class. It's happened to various teachers, sort of homophobic comments or sexist comments, things like that. And you really have to, I'm quite opinionated. So, it is very, very difficult sometimes to take a deep breath and go, okay, you can't be angry.
Yeah.
You can't tell them to you can't shut them down. You've got to try and approach this in a very rational way, or just say to them, okay, let's chat after class.
And our students, they're sponges.
Yeah.
They definitely absorb everything. So the way that I handle a situation, no matter how big or small, I have to be mindful that I have eyes on me that are looking at me. And I honestly believe that as teachers, we teach more than what we're teaching. And what I mean by that is we teach through our body language, we teach through how we handle situations, we teach through how we respond to situations, and our students are learning from all of those things. So if a teacher comes in a classroom thinking, oh, well, I'm going to read what I see here in the curriculum, they're going to learn that, and that's fine. I think they're mistaken in that aspect, because if another teacher were to come in and there was a confrontation, the students are learning from that as well. How is my teacher going to respond to the situation? How does my teacher respond to other teachers? Back when we were in the classroom, we're not now, students are looking at Do you speak to others when you're walking down the hallway? When someone approaches you and asks you a question, how do you handle those things? It may seem minute, but in the grand scheme of things, it's huge.
Yeah.
We are teaching our children how to be adults. We're teaching them how to interact, how to have relationships with other people as well.
Lovely. Okay. My next piece of advice is, again, it's a bit about communication. My advice to new teachers who would be very keen to answer questions from students. I always say if students ask a question, ask one back, throw it back to the class. What does this mean? And I would say, what does this mean? Back to the class, looking at everyone. Sometimes you're met with a wall of silence. That's fine. If they don't want to say it, that's very natural, especially depending on the culture as well. Some students are very outgoing and will just shout the answer. Some will just look at you like a deer in the headlights. So if you are met with silence, get students to discuss the question together in groups, and then maybe nominate someone or see who wants to volunteer themselves to answer it. Resist the temptation to explain everything yourself all the time. Maybe clarify what other students have said. And then you can do things like show a picture, write an example sentence, again, sort of facilitating and guiding rather than just feeding. Like, never, that's what I'm trying to say. Do not feed your students. Feeding them, teaching them, absolutely nothing. Use those concept checking questions, those instruction checking questions. Don't just assume they understand everything. Don't ever say, do you understand? They're never going to say no. They're just going to look at you and nod or just not react at all. And then you're like, great, let's move on. And you've missed an opportunity to clarify.
I absolutely agree with you. Questioning has always been, a topic of discussion for as many years as I've been teaching. Administrators are always looking for, okay, great lesson, but where are the questions? Because they want to see how are we prompting students to think for themselves. And teachers can, get in a space where they're thinking, okay, does everyone understand? Okay, great, let's move on. But you're right, there are some students that won't admit that they don't understand. And that's why a part of lesson planning is thinking about being intentional with the questions that you ask. Make sure that those questions have a place or have a point to say, does everyone understand? What is the intention of that question? What exactly are you looking for? For them to respond back and say, and if a student says they do not understand, are you prepared?
Yeah, in the EFL world, we would then go on to what we call concept checking questions, which is like if they don't understand a word, like I don't know, let's say frog, and you don't have a picture to hand, what color is it? Does it jump or does it run? What kind of noise does it make? Can you show me? That kind of thing. But also when you're talking about questions, are you also referring to critical thinking skills as well?
We definitely want to, we're teaching students how to reason. We're teaching students how to make connections between things that they read, between, their own life. We're teaching students to make connections between things that they've read and other stories that they've read. We're teaching students to make connections with other students. It's all about making those connections and being able to process, what does this all have to do with this?
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to get them to do, even within a story. Why did this character say what they said? Why did this character do what they did? Why is the story taking place in this particular setting? Being able to tie all of those things together is what we're really trying to get out of the students.
Yeah, and I would say also, from my perspective, that's very, very important as well. Not just comprehension questions, asking the whys and the hows as well is really important. And I always, even at lower levels, I'll always try and put a few critical thinking questions in there, because even if they don't have the language to really say what they want to say, it's just a very important part of development. And again, coming from a multicultural perspective, you'll find that certain nationalities and cultures really don't have a lot of critical thinking skills. It's the first time they've ever been introduced to it. And it's really nice seeing the light go on sometimes. Sometimes you won't get through to them because they're just years of conditioning, like they've always been taught in a certain way, but sometimes they get it, and it's so nice to see. And then sometimes you'll get the feedback from them as well about, oh, I learned so much in your class about the world, and I look at things in a different way, and it's so, so nice. And that's kind of when it makes it all worth it. Okay, my next bit of advice would be always ask more experienced teachers for help, especially if you're struggling to make part of your lesson communicative. Again, it goes back to encouraging as much communication as possible, but you'd be surprised how many teachers they just don't have the tools to do that, especially if they've come from maybe a more mainstream background and then they're going into EFL. They just don't have that capacity. Again, we call it teacher talk time and student talk time, and teacher talk time always tends to be far too high. So what I do at the beginning of each lesson, especially with lower levels, is I have like a prompt sheet with some very basic questions. What did you do yesterday? Make up little flashcards with questions for review. So if you've practiced, let's say the present simple or the past simple, make up a few little flashcards with some questions, put them in a bag, spend the first 10-15 minutes reviewing, because review is absolutely essential as well. I read somewhere that your lesson should be 80% review, 20% new information. Now that's usually quite impossible given the curriculum and the amount of information you have to sort of shove down their throats half the time, but always start with review and make it as communicative as possible. So, you know, in a few weeks my students know you get in the classroom, you sit down, I'll throw some cards on the table, go for it, test each other on your vocabulary, ask each other these questions, play this board game. So they spend the first 10-15 minutes just communicating. I'll walk around, I'll monitor, I won't bother them too much, but I'll just let them get on with it.
I think that's great. And unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, because I think teachers can make time for these opportunities. When we're teaching online, everything's pretty jam-packed. And as a teacher, you kind of have to use what you know about your students to make time for them to be able to talk, make time for them to be able to interact, make time for them to take breaks. The age that I teach, they need a lot of movement breaks, for example. So sometimes, even if they're not talking, they're moving, they're doing that. For example, if we do follow the leader, they're patting their knees, everyone else is patting their knees. They're clapping their hands, everyone is clapping their hands. Just those different, even though they're not verbally communicating, they're still connecting with each other. And that's huge.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for movement in general in classes. And the good thing about teaching English anyway is that there is plenty of room for dynamics in the classroom, swapping tables, changing groups, walking around the room, mingling activities, putting questions on the wall so they walk down, board races, you know, movement. I think I try and have movement in my class all the time, regardless of what we're teaching. You could even turn a reading lesson and make it, you know, put the questions on the wall, make it into some kind of race where they're in teams and they have to get the questions and the answers. Like there are so many ways you can make your lesson just full of movement, and the time goes faster and they get excited when you're like, okay, stand up, get into groups, you know, they know something exciting is going to happen. Even writing activities you can do, moving around, switching groups, you know. And I just think it doesn't matter whether they're young children or whether they're adults. I think everybody loves movement.
And you're spot on with that. I love that you said that, because with primary grades, there are things that we do that need to continue with the older students. Movement is a big one. Artistry is a big one. Young students, as much as they love to draw, older students love to draw as well. So I would advise for teachers that teach, the secondary age students or the middle school age students, the high school, even the collegiate level, remember the basics.
Yeah.
Include it and remember the basics. Everyone expresses themselves in different ways. So, as they get older, you don't have to just say, okay, we're just going to write. You can say, you know what, for this activity or for this prompt, I just want you to draw your response. And you'd be surprised the discussion that will come from that.
Yeah. Lovely. And I think also, I don't think anyone's too old for a game. Yeah, I've never had a bad response from anyone of any adult age. Let's play a board game. Let's have a board race. Never. They love it.
Yeah. And there was something that you'd also mentioned when you said, don't be afraid to ask to get help from experienced teachers. And I would like to advise teachers to that point that help is not a bad word.
Absolutely not.
You need it. We all need it. It doesn't matter if you've been teaching for 1 year, if you've been teaching for 30 years. help is not a bad word. We all have different levels of experience. We all have different levels. We all have different strengths, and we all have different areas of improvement. We are all here for the same purpose, which is to make a difference, which is to impact the lives of our students. So why not work together? You are really good at that. That's an area of improvement for me. Can you help me in this area so that that way I can improve? And I think that's at the end of the day, every year that you're working, and it doesn't even have to be a year. Every day is a new day. You gain new tools, you gain experience,
Yeah.
and that gives you something to offer to the next person.
Absolutely. And like, you do not want to become that teacher in the staff room, because there's always one. And myself and Shane talked about this in an earlier episode. It's around the episode 20 mark. We talked about teacher types, and there's always that one teacher who's been teaching for 20 odd years, who doesn't attend any professional development seminars, who just stagnates. And you do not want to become that teacher, because it gets boring as well. Like, I can't imagine just not even turning around and saying, oh, have you got an exercise for this? Or do you know, you got any advice for this? Even just that, do you have any photocopies for this? That's all it sometimes has to be. You don't have to have a deep, meaningful conversation. You could just say, have you got something for this? Brilliant. I'll add it to my arsenal of materials.
Exactly.
Moving on.
Let's not reinvent the wheel.
No.
And a lot of times the ideas that we have, sometimes they're brand spanking new ideas, and then sometimes they're things that have been done already. So why not use the resources that are available? And the only way that you can know those resources are available is if you ask. And sometimes that's all it takes, is asking. I mean, when you talk about types of teachers, there are some teachers that will readily share their resources with you. Oh, I've been teaching for so long. I have all of these things. If you need it, my door is open.
That's me.
And then you have some teachers that they have all of this information, but they won't share it unless they're asked. So, I just say go for it. Don't be afraid. And you know what? Even if that teacher says, I don't have it, or I can't help you, the fact that you advocated for yourself is what matters.
Yeah. And sometimes I think, like, you might get a bit precious about some of the materials that you've created yourself. Why am I going to give this to a teacher? They didn't spend 2 hours making this. They're going to take the credit for this. So give it to them in a form of a PDF with your name at the bottom, if you're that worried about it, so people can see who actually created the materials. Like, kind of related to that as well, I would say, like, when you're collecting new materials or ideas, don't be afraid to take risks with lesson ideas. Some ideas will absolutely fly, but inevitably, and I've said this before, some will bomb. It could be, there could be any number of reasons for that. It could just be the class, the dynamics of the class didn't work with it, or it was just a really bad idea. You overestimated the ability of the class. Your time just ran completely short. Your technology failed. There are so many, but just go for it. And I actually like saying to my students, okay, I'm going to try something today. I've never done it with anyone before. Tell me what you think at the end of the lesson. And they really appreciate that. You can see them going, ooh,
Yes, absolutely. Take it and be honest with your students. I think one thing that I love about my students, but something that I'm like, is that the fact that they can see right through you. Whether they can see when you're not ready. They can see when you're prepared. They can see when you're nervous. They can see when you're really excited. So if there's something new, just be honest about it and say, you know what, this is something new. I haven't tried it, but guess what? We're going to try it together. We're going to learn together. If it works, hooray. If it doesn't work, we've learned something new.
Yeah, and that gets reflected in your feedback. I mean, for my experience, obviously we offer feedback for students because they're adults, and they're much more able to articulate themselves about what they liked and didn't like. But a lot of the comments I've got in the past are things like, you can tell she loves her job, she's very passionate, she's very organized, and it's because it comes across. And you're honest. Like you say, honesty is always the best policy. Again, going back to I don't know the answer to that, I'll get back to you tomorrow. What's the big deal?
Exactly. And the thing is, we present ourselves as, sometimes teachers can hold themselves to this expectation that things are supposed to be perfect. And let me tell you, I learned very, very early on in my career that perfection does not exist. As much as I wanted it to, I learned very early on. And even though in that moment, just briefly, what happened was I had my lesson planned and I literally had it timed by the minute what I would do. And then we had a fire drill. So
Oh,
all my plans just went down the drain, but it taught me a very valuable lesson to be flexible, to know that things happen, to know that, hey, it's okay to, it's okay. Let me just say that it's okay. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've taken away being a teacher is that it's okay. Some days will be bad, some days will be good, but it is okay.
yeah. And going back to the, things don't always go as planned. One thing you will learn with experience, but can be very daunting as a an inexperienced teacher, is that element of having to wing it. I've only got, I don't have time to do this, or I've been given this class at short notice. What do I do? So again, going back to leaning on your colleagues, building up an arsenal of games, fillers, activities, materials. If you are asked to cover a class, don't panic. You don't have to do what's in the book if you're not prepared. Just photocopy a game or go online and find a lesson plan that's already done that doesn't take too much prep. But that element of winging it is absolutely essential. You have to learn how to improvise a lot of the time, because it never
Absolutely.
goes to plan.
Never. It
Ever.
never does. And but that's what makes, honestly, I think that's in a weird kind of way, that's what makes teaching fun because you get to be creative.
Yes, it definitely sort of feeds that part of your brain, doesn't it? That
Yeah, it
creative
makes
part
you
of your
think.
brain.
Yeah, it makes you think. And if you've taught, you are the one that sets the tone for your classroom.
Mm.
So if when things go wrong, you kind of get into a funk, then that's how your students will feel. But if you teach your students that when things go, I don't want to say wrong, but when things go, differently than planned, that it's an opportunity to, be creative. It's an opportunity to be flexible, to go with the flow, then you'll see that they're a lot more calm. They're a lot more relaxed when things like that happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
You set the tone. You are the example of how to handle those kinds of situations.
Yeah,
So definitely it's a skill to know how to wing it.
it is. And it comes over time, like a lot of stuff in teaching. It comes over time. Teaching is a skill you develop and you learn. So going back to if things don't go as planned as well, don't be afraid to abandon your lesson, because
Yeah.
if it's not working, if it's too difficult, if they're not responding, okay, fine, let's play a game. Let's have I always have like a little folder of, like, those flashcards I was telling you about, board games. um
Yeah.
there's a brilliant book for EFL teachers called 700 Activities, which if you don't have, get it. It's full of activities, low to no prep. Have a copy of something like that with you, and say to your class, okay, this isn't working, just have a little chat for a minute. I'm just going to find something else we can do. Okay, just give me a
Yeah.
moment. Fine. Again, honesty, communication.
Absolutely. And I've found that working online, there are times when my students, they're tired. They've had a long day, of learning. They've, given as much as they could. And sometimes we have to stop mid-lesson and say, you know what? Let's take a movement break. Let's
Yeah.
do something fun. They love Simon Says. No matter how many times we've played it, they cannot get enough of that. So knowing your students and just saying, okay, I see that they're getting tired. I see that they're not responding. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to, like you said, abandon the lesson sometimes and say, you know what, let's pick this back up tomorrow. Let's do
Yeah,
something fun.
exactly.
You'll get the most out of them if you do that than if you kind of ignore those signs and just say, for the sake of getting my lesson done, I'm going to keep going.
Absolutely. I've got the next one is kind of a three-parter, but it's all kind of connected, and I think
Mhm.
it's true for mainstream teachers as well. So the first thing I'm going to say here is about preparation. Don't be intimidated by the amount of time it takes you to prepare, because that will improve an experience. I mean, I remember when I was doing my teaching course, I'd spend an entire weekend planning a 1-hour lesson, and I remember once my parents were waiting to go out to dinner, Saturday night, I was sitting there cutting things out on the floor, trying to do something, and I just burst into tears. And I was in my mid-20s, and I was like, I can't go out with you. I haven't done it, And they're
Yeah,
like, just
yeah,
chill, just leave it. Okay. But now, I can throw a lesson together in a much shorter time. But that is also because I've built up a bank of materials. So my sort of part B to that is organize, save any materials you have, either in a physical file, label everything, or keep them in folders on your computer. Use a file for every course book you use. You'll use it again and again, so keep it all together. You'll just save so much time.
yeah, definitely. Let me tell you, my first year teaching, I would come to work at 7:45 a.m. and I would leave work at 7 p.m.
Yep.
And it seems like it was every single day because I was in my classroom cutting things. I was in my classroom copying. I was in, the copier room making copies. I was, organizing, prepping. Over time, you learn different ways to save time. For example, allowing your students to cut up some of the materials. That saves a great deal of time and they enjoy it as well. Getting them a part of the project. Having your students cut the materials, it saves time. And that's just one example. If you want to, decorate something, have your students be a part of the decoration process. Making your students a part of whatever it is that you're doing, it definitely saves time. But at the end of the day, organization is key.
Yeah.
You have to have in mind, okay, if I'm going to have my students participate in this project, at the very least, I have to organize those stations for them to help. Again, there's that word again, facilitate, whatever it is that we're doing. But definitely, I was that teacher, but with experience, it's gotten a lot better, I will say.
Yeah, I remember my first ever lesson. It was just in like a 6-week summer school. That was my first ever job. And just the sheer panic. We were given, like, there weren't many resources. And I had come from my teaching course where I'd spent, like I said, days preparing a lesson. And I just remember the panic I was in. And the other teachers, they had been teaching for a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever. And they were just, moseying about, making a couple of copies of things. And I'm like, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? And they were so cool, though. They were like,
Yeah.
oh, it's okay. You can do this and all this. And now I'm that teacher, But I mean, just the panic of,
Oh, yeah.
of
Yeah.
organizing and preparing a lesson, it was horrendous.
Yes, absolutely. And when you are a general education teacher, you're planning for multiple subjects. So when you talk about it taking a long time to plan, that is an understatement. But again, let me speak to the point of working with your team. I think that those who are listening, you'll probably hear that over and over and over again. Work with your team, because if you can do it to where, okay, hey, I'll plan for math this week. You can plan for reading, you can plan for science, delegate. Maybe you're not the one who's delegating, but be a part of that delegation.
Absolutely. And if you can, I've done this before in a school. I asked the manager, could we organize a bank of materials, because there was photocopies flying around everywhere. So I think they paid the teachers for an hour or 2 hours, and we basically pulled all our resources because we were teaching the same things. We had vocabulary files with like body parts, blah blah blah. We had more functional English files like going to the shops, things like that. And then there was these files for teachers to actually pull resources out and just save time. And I was really proud of that.
But it's just taking that initiative to say, I see a problem, I believe I have a solution. You just taking that initiative is what will allow you to grow as a teacher.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, so never think that because you're a new teacher that you don't have a seat at the table. You were hired for a reason. So keep that in mind when you go into the room to say, hey, I have an idea.
Is it your turn or my turn?
I think we're on a roll here, Erin, and we're feeding off of each other's ideas. You'd mentioned about when you're in the classroom, no matter how many years you've been teaching, always look for opportunities for professional development.
Yeah.
Always look for opportunities to grow. There are so many certifications that are out there. There are so many programs that are out there that aren't 4-year-long programs. Some programs are only 2 years, which still, sounds like a long time, but it goes by fast. So taking advantage of these different opportunities to grow, even while you're in the classroom, you'll find that when you reach that point where you're, thinking to yourself, okay, what's next? You'll realize that along the way, you've picked up so many tools. You've prepared yourself for that next step.
And I think also it goes back to that idea of not stagnating as well. And I think if you get a job
Yes.
and you're just happy plodding along teaching, brilliant, why not? But again, if you don't want to sort of, like you say, get more qualifications and things like that, at least again, always, like we keep saying, go back to your colleagues, get new ideas,
Yes.
attend the odd professional development session, and just keep your ideas fresh. That's like the least you should be doing, I think, as a teacher. My next pieces of advice are kind of linked to what you just said very tenuously in the vein of preparation. So there's a couple of things you should be doing. When you're doing your lesson plan, it's very important to anticipate problems in your planning stage. Like it could be a word you're teaching and its pronunciation. It could be problematic things that come along with the grammar you're teaching. So, for example, if you're teaching articles, do these things exist in the language of your class? A lot of Asian countries don't have articles. Polish doesn't have articles. What issues are you going to come across there? Present perfect, for example, it's used differently in certain languages. What problems are you going to have there? Again, this gets easier as you go, as you get to know the different nationalities and their issues. That gets easier. So linked to that, my part B would be if you're looking at your register of your class, you're looking at the nationalities of them, what linguistic issues do they have? What are you going to expect they're going to understand, not understand? Are they going to be able to pronounce, are they going to pronounce every word phonetically as it's written? Just these sorts of things so that you know what's coming. I think that's really important in a linguistic sense as well. What kind of problems do you anticipate in your classroom?
Well, since we have our classroom, again, it's inclusive. We teach a range of students. It's important to know, like you said, who we're teaching, where they're coming from. It's important to know, what's going on the news. It's important to know what's going on in our community. It's important to know, what's important to our students. So there are certain things that may come up, that are important to them. And again, giving them that space to be able to speak on that. We understand that every student is different, from, academically to their personality. So just allowing each student to feel safe in the classroom to, express themselves. I have some students who may not feel as comfortable talking, for example, but knowing that we use sign language, we use other ways of communicating with each other to where that student feels like, okay, I'm a part of this classroom just as everybody else, for example. Or we have some students that have other areas that they're working on. So knowing that makes me understand, okay, I may not be praising them for getting the right answer, but I'm praising them for raising their hand. I'm praising them for even participating. So the way that you accommodate for each student is how we kind of tailor the classroom to meet the needs of every student, to where we show that, okay, I understand where this student is coming from. I understand where that student's coming from. They're coming from two different places. I may not get the same product from this student as I would this other student, but I understand that to this student, this is their best. And you gain that insight by spending time with your students. And that's that time you mentioned earlier, to where you just allow your students to express themselves, allow them to talk.
Or not talk, as the case may be. Maybe they're too shy, they're not comfortable.
Right. And if you are that teacher that you'd mentioned earlier, that where it becomes their show, how can you learn your students?
True. And I think also, coming back to that word you use, safe, I would use comfortable in my sort of environment, but I think that's key, making your students feel comfortable, letting them know it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to get the wrong answer, it's okay not to speak perfectly, because again, depending on the culture, some cultures, they hate being wrong. and they'd rather not answer the question than risk being wrong, or they might need a lot of time to formulate the answer in their head, and other nationalities are much faster than them. There are so many variables, but again, going back to preparation, get to know who you're teaching, make everyone feel comfortable, and let everybody know that, you know, this is a safe space. This is a space where you can feel comfortable, be who you are, and everything's good.
Absolutely. It's key. Students need that. And that's how you'll get the most from them.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think it's your turn again.
Oh, yay. Okay. You know, we are so good at taking turns. We are being a great example.
Do you know what? Saying that, it's taken everything I have, because I'm a very kind of, I really want to speak all the time, and I'm like really holding back, so I'm not jumping all over what you're saying. It's killing me.
You are doing great. Let me just say, I'm really enjoying this conversation that we're having, and it's so important. You know, I think more teachers should have these kinds of discussions. But anyhow, my next advice, we should always still keep in mind to invest in ourselves, if possible. I say if possible. And what do I mean by that? If you can, try to save at least a little bit each paycheck. I know that may seem like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, we're talking, you know, when we talk about preparation, when we talk about, you know, where do you see yourself, you know, just save a little bit each paycheck if possible. It makes a big difference. Try to take advantage of reimbursement opportunities. If you, for example, like most of us, you know, you did a program, and maybe you have, you know, student loans. There are different programs that will reimburse. There are programs, for example, loan forgiveness, if that fits your situation. You know, that may be a good program for you.
I love that you've gone on to the more practical things, because that's exactly where I was heading.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I can't really add a lot to that, because your situation is very different from EFL teachers. Although I would say, in terms of pay, we kind of go through the same thing. We're never paid for prep time at all. We're very rare will you get a job where you've got a salary. You're paid by the contact hours that you teach.
I see.
So you really have to have a passion for it. And sort of leading on from that, depending on what country you're in, my advice would be to join a union if you can. In Ireland, for example, the unions are actually starting to gain a little bit of traction. And just before the pandemic, like, they were doing really, really well. And I think it's all kind of fallen behind a little bit now. But try and join a union if you can, some sort of organization, because it's a very unstable industry. It doesn't protect its teachers. Be prepared to meet a lot of dodgy bosses in a lot of dodgy schools. Again, go back to somewhere around episode 2021. We did an episode on owner and manager types. There are a lot of very dodgy schools out there that are just cash cows for these owners. I would look online, look for forums for recommendations, look on sort of blacklist websites as well to stay away from certain schools. You will hear a lot of horror stories, unfortunately. That's just the way the industry is. However, on the upside, we get the opportunity to travel, which I think is one of the reasons a lot of people do become EFL teachers. So my advice there would be travel. Again, do your research. You know, yes, Spain, you would have a tremendous lifestyle. The weather's great, the food's amazing, the wine's fantastic. But if you want to do some serious saving, does the pay reflect that? If you want to just put your head down and work really hard for 2 years, maybe a job in the Middle East would be a lot better. But obviously with that, depending on where you're from, might come with a lot of restrictions on your lifestyle, but the money is excellent. So travel, but do your research. We're going to have to wrap this up, because we've been recording for ages now. I've got one more thing. How many things have you got?
Just one more thing.
Okay,
one more thing. Yes.
Whose turn is it?
I think it's your turn now.
All right. Okay, so this will be my final piece of advice. So again, on a more practical sense, if you are looking for a job in a language school, generally speaking, it's a complete opposite from state schools. Our busiest period is the summer. That 6 weeks in the summer, we are rammed. So if you are looking for a full-time job, the best time to apply is around April time. Don't leave it any later than that. Otherwise, the chances are the only schools you're going to get into are the really dodgy ones, because all the good ones will snap up all the good teachers who have applied much earlier.
The last bit of advice that I would give is join a support group that best fits you. Take advantage of social media to follow support groups and really network. As Erin mentioned earlier, I am the creator of New Teachers Connect, and I created that believing, if I need support, I'm sure I'm not the only one. So New Teachers Connect is a support group for not just new teachers, but for all teachers. And our thing is community service, serving beyond the classroom. So if you have a love or, a passion for community service, if you have a passion for serving, not just in the classroom, but out of the classroom, I welcome you to join New Teachers Connect, where you'll have the opportunity to do that and so much more. We're on Facebook, New Teachers Connect. We have a regular account, and we also have a private support group. And we're on Instagram at New Teachers Connect _IG.
That's such a lovely note to finish on, because, I was just saying to someone the other day that I really resisted joining Instagram for a long time. I'm not a big social media person, but I made my Instagram account last year for the podcast. The amount of lovely people, teachers that I've met, that I've talked to, that have left lovely comments. But the common denominator is that everyone's looking out for each other.
Absolutely.
There's so much support out there. It's just so lovely. And I think it's really, like, personally, I've been unemployed since last March. It's coming up for a year now. And for someone who loves their job and who's very social, it's been tough. But I think a big part of helping me get through this is the people that I've met on Instagram, such as yourself. We've had a great conversation. We had a lovely conversation a few weeks ago when we first sort of met face to face on Zoom, and it's keeping me sane.
Yeah. I think that Zoom has opened a new world to, interact with people who you would have never have thought you would be, interacting with. And literally two different sides of the world. And here we are. And again, Erin, I thank you for this opportunity to be able to have this conversation with you. I love what I do. I love discussing, how we can support teachers, make a difference in our field. So this is awesome. So, thank you again for this opportunity, for your time.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for your time as well. What a woman, everyone, Melinda Thomas. And on that lovely positive note, we'll say goodbye to you guys. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. Follow Everything EFL on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, and engage with me and my followers. If you have a suggestion, idea, or any feedback, my email is on the show notes. Finally, and most importantly, share this episode on social media and tell your colleagues. Share the love. Bye.